Hello everyone, meteorologist Danielle here, joined by meteorologist Mark Collins, and we are talking everything earthquake today because some people in the Carolinas, Mark, may have felt a quake this morning.
That's kind of crazy. Just about 300 miles from Jacksonville, a 3.3 earthquake. Did you feel the earthquake here in Jacksonville?
No.
No. In fact,
not even close.
No, not even. But the folks around Columbia did.
Yeah, all the way up. Some people said into the Charlotte area because the earthquake was shallow on the ground, so you can feel it just a little bit further. But like you mentioned, it is a low on the Richter scale here, and we have this explainer. It sits in between the 2.5 to the 5.4 region, which is minor earthquake. Some damage can be felt, but nothing too crazy out there. So again, it's a 3.3. It's when you get to the 5 to 6 to the 7 when you get those high-level earthquakes, some of which a lot of those are felt more so on the West Coast in California on some of those
But when you're talking about anything over 5, it can cause some damage, light damage on the lower side. And then once you're up at 7 through 9, those are the big headlines where you see building collapses from those earthquakes. So you're showing us some fault lines here. So when you think of a fault line, think of it as a place where there's movement in the crust of the earth, or the plates of the earth. And what do I mean by plates? So the soil that we stand on is on these plates that move around underground, and that's why continents have shifted over time. And wherever the plates kind of rub together, there's friction that builds up, and eventually they can kind of move and create an earthquake. And there's some very old ones here that date all the way back to when the Appalachian Mountains were formed millions of years ago.
And a lot of people don't think of fault lines being in the Carolinas like South Carolina, but some of which we've seen here are the eastern Piedmont, which is in kind of that purpley red color. That goes right through Columbia, and we've actually seen some earthquakes like this one right along that fault recently. And then moving further to the west coast there, you have the Brevard Fault as well. And we can get the seismic activity along some of those faults that people just don't know exist because they are so old.
They're not the headline grabbing faults like the San Andreas.
Not even close.
Here in Charleston, there was one in 1886 that was so strong that it created trembles all the way down in St. Augustine. And in fact, some plaster on the walls fell off from a 7.3 earthquake that happened in that area. And even up in New York, they were feeling the effects there back in the 1800s. Charleston is due, according to some geologists, they feel that over the next 50 years, there is the potential for another big one in that area.
And that's a historic zone for faults there. And they were talking about that. And like you said, a 7.3, that's large on the Richter scale. So that can cause, if you go back and ever Google it and look at the images, obviously they're all in black and white. It was back in 1886. But you can see a lot of the damage there. And imagine putting that in today's world with the sustainability down in Charleston, all those historic buildings, how that would kind of hold up now. These are just kind of things you think about when it comes to these earthquakes here. And we have different kinds of earthquakes that you can have. You have a normal fault, a reverse fault, and a strike-slip fault.
So the first two are capable of causing tsunamis because when these happen under the seafloor, it can thrust the water up and create the tsunami. The strike-slip fault are basically a side-to-side motion, and there's no forward upward thrust of water. This is what would likely happen off of South Carolina if there were an underwater earthquake there. So tsunamis are unlikely in the Atlantic, but that's not ruling out underwater landslides that can fall, that can occur on the continental shelf. And that's our concern off of the Bahama Bank. If mud were to slide down, that could throw a tsunami back towards Florida.
Yeah, and there are some big faults here across the U.S. Big one a lot of people might know of is over in California on the coast, the San Andreas Fault. You can see all the way up from San Francisco all the way down past Los Angeles, and that is a big one that we always talk about. We also have the Denali Fault up into portions there of Alaska, and we've also seen some very large earthquakes along that as well.
And when you look at the New Madrid Fault, this is in the middle of the United States near Missouri, and this is in the middle of a plate. So this is an ancient fault line, one that's not really very active, but on average, every year there's a minor, like under a 3 on the Richter scale, type of earthquake in that area.
And we also have the Ramapo Fault up in areas of New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. You don't hear much about earthquakes in this region. Again, can be one of those ancient faults, but it does still exist and it is still possible. So again, there's a lot of things when it comes to earthquakes, and you can always read more stories on this story on news4jax.com.
We'll see you online.